Hello, everyone. LC Holt here, and this is my update for the week of May the 4th. Today, I'm joined once again by my pals Ryan Rayonec and Rebecca Ivey. Welcome to the show. We're going to be talking today about another Hollywood true crime story. One, once again, like with the Robert Blake case that happened in the early 2000s. And this, like the Robert Blake case, got a lot of news surrounding the murder trial of Lana Clarkson as committed by Phil Spector, or so the Los Angeles District Attorney said. We're going to go over first sort of the night in question. Okay, so let's start on February the 2nd, 2003. Okay, Phil Spector, who we'll go into his background a little later, was a very well-respected and very wealthy music producer who had been retired for many, many years. He was living in Alhambra at the time. He went to a restaurant, kind of a trendy little restaurant called Dantana's on the Sunset Strip around 11:30, having a date, the waiter said, with a young lady. Not the young lady who would end up dead by the end of the night, but another young lady. Phil Spector had like a salad and something to drink. The unusual thing the bartender said about that night was that he ordered an alcoholic beverage, which Phil Spector had never, since he'd been coming to Dantana's, ordered an alcoholic beverage. He'd had a major drinking problem at one point, and he had tried to get sober and apparently was sober, even though he took medication for his manic depressive disorder. But he did get an alcoholic beverage that night. Didn't stay too long. They got he basically the check came to $55, and Phil Spector tipped $500. Damn good tipper, that Phil. He was known for leaving big tips, but this was even a little large for Phil's taste. But
what year was this again?
This was 2003.
I'm sure that the guy at the restaurant's like, man, we need to get him to have a drink every night.
I know. We need to get him good and sly. But Phil tipped $500. He left. At some point, the young lady he was with, whether she was taken back to her home, not quite sure. All we do know is that his next stop after Dantana's was the House of Blues. And he didn't arrive there until about 2 o'clock in the morning. They closed shortly thereafter, but he made it right at like closing time by himself now. He was in the back of a Mercedes that he owned. He had a driver. He didn't drive himself. He had not driven himself in many years because we'll go into it probably a little more later, but he had had a terrible car accident years before and after that refused to drive himself. So his driver took him in his Mercedes to the House of Blues, went in there, and he started up a conversation with a hostess in the VIP room, a young lady named Lana Clarkson. She was 40 years old, an actress who had taken this job to kind of help make ends meet, but was still doing television roles here and there. She had starred in a couple movies. We'll get more into that later. But she was a very, very beautiful blonde lady, big smile, white teeth. Even at 40, she looked gorgeous, like a model, you know. So I'm sure Phil Spector was just like, ooh, wow, you know, going after her hardcore, making those very sounds.
Yes.
He was known to do this, to try and pick up women, waitresses, and things that, and he used sort of his clout. You know, he could say, I'm Phil Spector, and some people would, I'm sure a lot of people would go, oh, Phil Spector. And they would see him in his nice clothes and his car and his wig.
Ryan wouldn't have.
Ryan has no idea.
Ryan would have been like, who the fuck are you? No, I can't believe I've never heard of this guy. But yeah, it's interesting learning just a little I've known so far.
And I get the feeling Phil Spector would probably be the kind of guy who would give you all his credits. You know?
Oh, like yeah.
If he
it's
met
on
a
his
girl,
business card.
Right.
I got that from you know what I saw last night of what Pacino did. Or what,
Yeah.
no, I mean Pacino. So
Right.
I got a good glimpse of his attitude. So I'm sure he would have.
He was
He would have
quite
took an hour doing it if you let him.
Well, he probably took about 45 minutes because that's how long he was at the House of Blues. And by the time he'd finished listing his credits to Lana Clarkson, the place was
He
closed.
just hit the highlights that night.
That's right. As many as he could, all the ones everybody knows.
Yeah.
Which are
all those jokes about Chuck Norris, they're really about me.
Exactly. Which he has quite a few high notes, I must admit. I mean, when we get into his biography, well, I'll list some of them and you'll be like, whoa, wow, he did that. But anyway, 2:45 in the morning, him and Lana climb into the back of the Mercedes. The driver takes off, goes back to his home in Alhambra, which is a working class neighborhood, but happens to have a huge mansion on the hill. And it was a house that he had bought in 1998. He called it the Castle, the Pyrenees Castle.
You know what I thought of when you said that? Like just a normal neighborhood with this huge house on the hill. I was thinking Edward Scissorhands for some reason.
I know that's what you were thinking. Yeah.
How eerie is that, though, that I just found that other house? You never told me that.
Do
that
what?
Castle house. I just found that Castle house, like a week or two back.
Yeah.
You had never told me this connection, so that's right. That's kind of funny. I found my own little Phil Spector impersonator over here.
Yeah. Phil loved that. If you saw this house, you would think Phil had built it, but he actually didn't build it. He bought it and moved in.
Did he have a Batmobile?
No, but he had it. But the Mercedes was black. I mean, that made that.
Well, this castle had a Batmobile.
And I saw it. You showed me the picture of it, the video of it. But anyway, yeah. So Phil, I don't think he lived in the Vegas castle, but he certainly lived in the Alhambra castle. But he goes inside. The chauffeur, I think, is going to wait outside and take the young lady home when all this said and done. But gets home around about 3:00 in the morning. He goes inside with the young lady, Lana Clarkson, for about an hour. No idea what happens. Nobody but Phil Spector and Lana Clarkson knows. What we do know is that around a little after 4:00, the chauffeur is sitting in the car, and suddenly, bam! He hears a gunshot from inside the mansion. He gets up out of the car, and as soon as he gets out of the car, Phil Spector, wearing sort of like blousey silk pajamas, comes out.
Why not?
Why not?
He's like, let me slip into something more comfortable, he says.
And so there he is in his blousey silk pajamas. And so blousey silk pajamas, and the blousey silk pajamas, that will come. I'm mentioning that for a reason, because it's going to come in handy.
Did he change wigs? Was it like in, Return of Oz where she changes heads? He just changes hair?
He probably,
occasion?
I doubt, he probably had the same wig on, but something I could guarantee you is that he wasn't bald-headed as he is in life. He never takes the damn wigs off unless he's in prison. But anyway, so he walks out of the door and he's got a gun in his hand. And he has this kind of look, wide-eyed look on his face, which isn't that unusual for Phil Spector. But he says, I think I just killed somebody. And the driver's like, what? And Phil says, I think I just killed somebody. And so the driver runs and actually doesn't call an ambulance first. He calls Phil Spector's assistant. And Phil Spector's assistant says, you need to call 911.
That would be you on the phone. Why are you calling me?
Exactly. I mean, Christ. But anyway, so he calls 911 finally after a brief conversation with the assistant. This always reminds me of the Heath Ledger thing, where you call Mary-Kate Olsen first. It's like, what are you talking about? Call the fucking cops. But anyway, with the Phil, with the Phil,
I want to know what Michelle thinks.
Yeah, right. We need to get Michelle's opinion, half of Michelle's opinion. But the cops arrive at 5:02 a.m. Okay, and this is the part Ryan, I think, is going to like, and it's also ties into the blousey pajama thing. So the cops get there. Phil Spector is standing in the foyer looking at a woman who's sitting in a chair. It's Lana Clarkson, with blood running out of her mouth. And she has a gun, and the gun is on the floor right at her feet. And she is dead. And so what happens basically is the cops tell Spector, we need to see your hands, because his hands are in his pockets of his blousey pajamas. And he says, the cops say, let us see your hands. He refuses to take his hands out of his pockets. And so the cops keep telling him, they say, sir, show us your hands. And he starts to back away. And when he starts to back away, they have no choice. They pull a taser and they shoot him with a taser. But the barbs of the tasers, it hits his blousey shirt and sticks in it and doesn't go into his skin. So they're like, wait. And then he starts to freak out and really starts to resist arrest. The cops run and they tackle Phil Spector and they knock his little ass to the ground. They smash his nose, they blacken his eyes. If you know anything about Phil Spector, he's about the size of a ferret. Like if when it stands up on its hind legs, that's Phil Spector. Sort of looks like one too. So then they take him into custody. It's about 5 o'clock before they take him into custody because the cops have this long sort of conversation with him. There was a bit of a standoff where he didn't want them to come into the house, came into the house, and then all of this knocking him down and all that happened. So he was arrested on suspicion of murder, taken to the police station there in Alhambra. Now, the problem with Phil Spector, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the man himself. Phil Spector always had this weird delusional personality. Maybe it sprang from his childhood. I mean, he was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, and his parents were first cousins. Maybe that's why he looks the way he looks. I'm not sure. But they came over to America as adults. He was just a little boy and moved to the Bronx. He was born in 1939, right? His dad killed himself when he was only 10 years old. When Phil Spector was 10 years old.
Allegedly.
Right, killed himself. And I'm not sure how it's sort of like, there was another show where we were talking about something and then Rebecca was like, how did he kill himself? Well,
it was the Robert Blake one.
Was it the Robert Blake one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because his father killed himself too. Wow, there's a lot of connections.
What a trend here.
And it's kind of going on around the same time because Robert Blake killed his wife 2 years prior, allegedly. But anyway, so yes, after the suicide of the father, the mother picked up stakes and moved to Los Angeles and took a job as a seamstress. And it was while Philip was a teenager that he and some classmates formed a band because Phil was musically inclined. And they formed a band called the Teddy Bears. Teddy Bears was sort of like, it was the kind of music that you might hear in the late 50s, but they made quite a hit. They made quite an impression with a song that Phil wrote. The title was based on the epitaph of his father's tombstone. To Know Him is to Love Him was the name of the song. The lead singer, who was a lady, sung that tune for the Teddy Bears. This song climbed to the top of the charts nationally, was a huge hit right off the bat, and Phil was still basically a teenager.
I still play it at gigs.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do occasionally. I'll pull that one out. I've auditioned with it as well.
It's a good song.
Yeah, I did a 50s show, and I used that song.
Give us a couple bars. Give us a couple bars.
Oh, I'm good.
But anyway, it would be weird. I would, but it would be really weird to say. It's kind of a female song. But anyway, he met a record producer named Stan Ross for Gold Star Studios, and around this time, and this Stan Ross fella tutored him in the production side of music recording. So even as he was doing these songs with the Teddy Bears, I mean, songs like "Don't You Worry, My Little Pet." I love that title.
The 50s had really good titles. The 50s and 60s, they were just really.
They were long and like that.
You had to think also. This is the era that gave us Patti Page singing "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?"
Yes. Right.
earlier in the decade, you had Les Paul and Mary Ford, Tiger Rag, where like when the lines was here, kitty, 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 here, puss, puss, here, kitty, 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 here, puss, puss. And that's like a whole line of the song. And you're just like,
All right, here, kitty,
sorry.
Here, kitty, kitty, puss, puss. Okay, Ryan, take it.
No, I'm good. There's nothing I can say right now that's going to be positive.
Well, this is much to Ryan's chagrin. The Teddy Bears disbanded in 1959. So keep in mind now, only 10 years has passed. So since his father's suicide, so Phil is only 20 years old. So 20 years old, he's already written a #1 hit tune on the national charts, and he's written a number of other songs, Don't Worry My Little Pet, amongst others. So after that, he sort of went through some time as a studio musician, and he did some engineering, sort of moved into the behind the scenes side of the trade, and really started to pursue the idea of being a music producer rather than performer, and of course a songwriter, because he wrote a lot of these songs. He produced people like
more money.
I was going to say, it's funny I brought up Les Paul because, Les Paul also invented multi-tracking, which would come into great help for his recording techniques with the wall of sound.
Yes, Phil Spector was very well known for what they later called the wall of sound. It is pretty much his singular invention. And as Rebecca said, it involved a lot of multi-tracking, which is where you would lay down one version of the piano, then you would go over it with another, take, and then you would go over it with another take, and the sound would get bigger and bigger and bigger. And he particularly loved horns and strings. So there were a lot of big arrangements, orchestrations where the strings rose and the horns went wild in the background. He liked a lot of sound, and he experimented with tambourines and then going like a lot of experimental stuff, and it created a very characteristic. I'm just trying to think what went through your head, Ryan? Why are you laughing?
I just forgot about what part I was laughing at, but it was funny to me.
Experiment. As soon as I said experiment, Ryan went straight into that.
I think I have this image ever since you said tambourine and Phil Spector playing one.
Yeah, like bouncing it off his wig.
I think he did that to Ronnie Spector. He bounced it off of her. That's terrible. I shouldn't have made that joke. That was inappropriate.
We're getting to her.
Okay.
Now, he started his own record label with a guy named Lester Sill. It was called Phyllis Records. Phil, his name, and the Les from Lester, Phyllis. And then he started to produce solo artists like Connie Francis. He searched out a lot of talent. The Crystals was one of his big bands. He did several hits for them. He put together groups for people like Darlene Love. The name of her band was, help me, Rebecca. What was the name of Darlene Love's bands? Oh, damn, I went right out of my head. But he put together several bands for her. They did that. One of them did Not Too Young to Get Married, but I can't remember what the band was. But Darlene Love was the lead singer.
What country did that come out in?
Well, I could say, but I'm afraid to. Why do lovers break each other's hearts? You see, all of these Phil Spector songs had long titles, and it always had some weird romantic sentiment to it, But anyway, during this time period is when the wall of sound thing came about.
I was fine without your side, Rebecca. It's just too much.
Pushed him over the edge.
I was fine. Just like right when I was ready to let it go.
Not Too Young to Get Married. Yeah, I think that was a big hit in Alabama, I think.
Yes.
By the early '60s,
Not too young to get married to your cousin.
Right, like his parents had.
I was making the joke not so much about Alabama. I was talking about the world. Like, there's a lot of places like, look, she's breathing.
Well, I think Russia was one of those places because remember that's where his parents came from, and they're kissing cousins. Anyway, early '60s, Phyllis Records had their first #1 hit. "You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'." I think everyone's heard that song, or at least knows the title of it. "Unchained Melody" by the Righteous Brothers. Phil discovered the Righteous Brothers, put them on his record, and then passed them off to somebody else, which probably was not.
To happen a lot back then.
But with the Righteous Brothers, that probably wasn't the best idea. I think I would have held on to them.
Yeah.
But because Unchained Melody was and is just like one of those quintessential recordings that's still around. You know, they still play it on movies.
On Ghost.
Yeah. That. After Ghost came out 25 years later, Phil got some big checks for producing that one. He also discovered in 1966 a little act you might have heard of called Ike and Tina Turner.
Yep.
And he produced them. But soon after that...
Some of that Tina Turner money.
You got some of that Tina Turner money? And good old Ike, you know, Ike was still slapping Tina around. I guess Phil might have taken some cues from him because he wound up...
Maybe they hung out and discussed how to handle their women.
Well, apparently that's how Phil handled his third wife, who became Ronnie Spector, but she was the lead singer of one of his bands called the Ronettes. Maybe the Ronettes were the ones who did Not Too Young to Get Married.
In fairness, Ronald Reagan used to slap women on TV.
Yeah, and he played a bad guy one time, Ronald Reagan did.
Mm-hmm.
Phil Spector played himself on an episode of I Dreamed of Jeannie. I remember that.
Yeah.
That just sounds
funny. When they went to Hollywood and...
Well, do you remember in Easy Rider, Phil is in there as a drug dealer? If you watch Easy Rider, Phil Spector pops up in a scene playing a drug dealer. So he sort of dipped his toe into some acting, too. But right around the time he got married to Ronnie, she was originally Ronnie Bennett, and then she became Ronnie Spector. He married her in 1968.
The Ronettes.
Yes, that was around the time of the when he was starting to branch out into acting. It was also around the time that he started to become a recluse. I think I said before he had a really bad car accident at one point, so bad that I'll put it this way: he was driving, didn't have a seatbelt on, he was probably a little liquored up, maybe some cocaine, hit a guardrail, and his whole body went head first through the windshield. So his head broke his fall, and it split his head open.
His head broke his fall. That's horrible.
Split his head open, caused him some major head injuries, which some people said might have contributed later to some of his
weirdness.
Yeah, some of his imbalances. Though, in all fairness, Phil was pretty weird before. Phil had this persecution complex, and it seemed to come from a very early age. There's stories of him going to his 10-year reunion, high school reunion, as a millionaire at this point. Because you have to remember, by 21 years old, Phil was a millionaire. So by the time of his high school reunion, he was a multi-millionaire. And he went to his high school reunion with 3 bodyguards who were there only to keep his old friends, who he said treated him poorly in school, and then after, away from him.
Well,
why would you even go?
That's the point. I think that his point was he was going to go to show people how successful he was, and just to kind of rub it in their face by bringing these 3 guys who would literally push people away if they got close to him. And then Phil sort of walked amongst them, little bitty ferret Phil walked amongst them, sort of looking around at all these people and just saying, look at me, look at this clothes, look at this jewelry I have.
And just sitting over in a corner by himself.
Yes. Yeah, reveling in how much more successful he was than they were, and showing it all.
Jerry Krause.
Exactly. Good point. Yes. That was sort of the Phil Spector deal. He was the nerd who made it big, and by God, he's going to show everybody, rub everybody's face in it.
You'll see. I'm going to draft Joakim Noah.
See, that would be these Phil Spector equivalent of that would be any one of these artists that he started a career for with his Wall of Sound. But in the late 60s, Phil started to become a recluse. I think sort of his mental problems were starting to get to him a little bit. And he's remained in pretty much isolation for the majority of the 70s, with a few notable exceptions. John Lennon reached into his little hole and ripped Phil Spector out of it and said, "You're going to produce an album for me." And he did. And that album included songs like Imagine. He produced the song called Instant Karma, huge hits for John Lennon. He was also brought in around this time because the Beatles were splitting up. They had a lot of material for their last album, but it wasn't releasable yet. So John Lennon and George Harrison, he also produced for George Harrison in the 70s, they asked Phil Spector to put together a last album for the Beatles, finish off these recordings they had, and that became the album Let It Be, which was released much to Paul McCartney's chagrin, because he didn't like the wall of sound instrumentation on some of his songs.
Which is why years later you have Let It Be naked.
Yes, he basically, that's where Paul McCartney went in and took out all of Phil Spector's horns and shit.
He probably also used the murder trial as an excuse as well.
Right, exactly.
Like, no, let's get him off of this. Yeah.
But that's what happened. He did come out of, he worked with Harrison, he worked with Lennon, he worked with Yoko Ono in the 1970s.
Do you think Lennon maybe contributed to his later problems?
I know that Lennon's murder had a huge effect on Phil Spector. Huge.
With his if he's paranoid.
That's exactly it. He became wildly paranoid after the murder of John Lennon. There are a couple other notable exceptions. He started carrying a lot more guns after John Lennon's murder, but he already did it before, because he had produced an album for Leonard Cohen. And Leonard Cohen told the story that at one point, sitting in the mixing booth, Phil Spector held up a gun and put it to Leonard Cohen's throat. And he said, "Leonard, I love you." And Leonard Cohen said that he told him, "I certainly hope you do, Phil," because he had a gun to his chin.
And they never worked again together.
No. There was a famous incident in which he fired a gun into the studio of John Lennon's. He got angry about something and shot off a gun, which is kind of ironic in hindsight. And one of the last albums that Phil Spector produced was for the Ramones. And that has probably one of the most infamous stories, in which Phil Spector apparently held a gun on the drummer of the Ramones until he played the beat exactly correctly.
That's the story I heard.
Motivation.
Wasn't he shooting this? I heard he was shooting the ceiling, though, or something like that.
He probably shot up the ceiling, yeah, because after the Lennon, like John Lennon,
Yosemite Sam Little Midget, like the actual little guy.
Yes, and I think he did that with the Ramones. I know he did it with John Lennon. He liked to take out a lot of his aggression on the ceilings with his revolvers. Didn't do much in the 80s, though. He kind of fell away. He got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame around 89. And it's so funny when he comes up on stage at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Phil Spector's like, he's doing these like weird arm movements. He's so excited. He's grabbing people and hugging them, grabbing people, pulling them down to his level and kissing them. But he remained largely inactive. And that goes all the way up through the 90s and to the point of this murder.
Yeah, I think the only thing I ever saw of them, probably late 80s, early 90s, was, I think it was like remember Current Affairs, that TV show? I can't remember if that, or it was a show like that. And they had Ronnie Spector on there, and she was talking about her marriage to Phil Spector, and I guess saying that he was, kind of abusive. And
yes, because their marriage did not last. Ronnie had to literally escape from Phil Spector.
She was talking. Yeah, that's what she talked about in the interview. Yeah.
She had to plan one night when she could run out of the house and down the street to get away from him, because she said that he was holding her hostage. And she pointed out in that interview, I'm glad you pointed that out, Rebecca, that he did like to brandish guns around her. And she said that at one point, Phil took her into the basement where there was a coffin and said, "If you ever leave me, this is for you." So Phil's got, like I say, major issues. I think Ronnie literally ran away at just the right time. And then they divorced. Luckily, she did not end up in the coffin. Some bad things happened to Phil along the way. He had a 9-year-old son who had died of leukemia. from one of his other marriages, which was sort of a tragedy. I think that kind of hit him hard. But beyond that, he was just known in his later years for living a reclusive life. He had gotten sober, as I said before, had stopped taking a lot of like the pills he used to take. So a lot of his friends thought, oh, hey, Phil's turning around. Maybe he's taking control of his life a little bit more. That said, there were 4 women who came out later after the Lana Clarkson incident and said that he had also brought them to his house, and when they rebuked him or wanted to leave and he didn't want them to leave yet, they said that he pulled out guns on them. I mean, can you imagine that shit? This is like, he's so desperate.
That's why you never go home with someone you meet that night. I'm sorry. You run an FBI background check on those people.
Yeah,
Elsie will tell you I'm not gonna play any games. I saw Patty Duke movies.
That's right.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, this guy wouldn't have done well in 2018.
Say what?
This guy wouldn't have done well in 2018. He was mad about just being touched a little bit. He's like, look, sleep with me or I'll kill you.
Well, that's exactly the way it was. Yeah. I mean, he would keep women there against their will, or at least attempt to. Now, luckily, these 4 women in question managed to get out.
What did they do? Like throw a cream puff at him and run, or?
Well, I mean, it can't be too hard to knock Phil Spector down. You probably don't need the strength of 7 cops to do it. He's just such a little guy.
Or maybe they promised him a hookup at a wig store.
Maybe so. Maybe they just sort of like went into the bathroom and went out the window.
Like Ronnie did.
Yeah.
They saw that same special I did.
Yeah, and they were like,
I remember
this is the way to get away.
Could have been too, like back then, the aura of being a millionaire, like millionaires weren't as common as they are today.
And I think he used that to his advantage. Like I said before, he was the guy to list your credits. He would show you his nice jewelry and his fancy car, and he would say, hey, would you like to come back? And so I guess they didn't think they were going home with someone who was, it's not, I mean, and I'm sure some people in Hollywood especially wouldn't mind saying I spent the night with Phil Spector. I mean, yes, granted, many people might say that and throw up in their throat a little bit, but not everybody is the same. I think I've known some people who would like to go home with Phil Spector just to say, oh, I went home with Phil Spector,
and it's not me.
Shia.
Yeah. I'm so tempted to just keep going on that, Ryan. You can tell how I'm sort of biting my lip about that one. But I will say this, Lana Clarkson, I don't think that she knew she was going home with such a crazy fucker.
Yeah.
Maybe she was taken a little bit by his celebrity. She worked at the House of Blues around musicians. A lot of those musicians were most likely inspired by the kind of music Phil Spector had spent much of his early career producing and writing. So
I'm sure if she'd asked someone, hey, what about, they're like, oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, that's Phil Spector, you are at the House of Blues. She was a good bit younger than Phil. She was 40 years old. By this point, he was already up in his 60s. She had been a fashion model. She'd done small roles in movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, if you remember that. She was the teacher's wife in that. She also, if you watch Scarface and the scene in the Babylon Club where Tony Montana is dancing with Michelle Pfeiffer, if you look right behind him, that's Lana Clarkson dancing right behind him. So she had little walk-on roles and bit parts and stuff like that. She actually won some leading roles in a few B movies produced by the famous Roger Corman, who seemed to give every director of a certain generation their first job. She was in some fantasy films of his, which, are Roger Corman B movies. There's nothing wonderful about them. One was called Death Stalker, and then the other one, the one that she starred in, was called Barbarian Queen. Sounds like a winner. But she was the Barbarian Queen. And And then do you know that Barbarian Queen actually spawned a sequel?
Oh.
So that's pretty big. Lana was known to go to a few conventions and sign, for some of these B movies she did. So
if Phil had known, he could have written a song, "Oh, My Little Barbarian Queen."
Exactly, that's right up his alley. That's the title. Perfect. God, we need to come up with some more Phil Spector titles. She drank her water and then she drank me down. It'd be shit like that. Just some random weird romantic sentiment. Christmas came twice this year, then came twice in my pants, or something. Though that one may be a little too far for Phil Spector.
Yeah.
But anyway, Lana was a cult film star, and she did have a slight fan base. So it's not as if she was a complete unknown.
Yeah.
She had some success. It was just success in the B arena. She also made some, numerous TV appearances. An episode here, an episode there. Nothing like a lead in a series or anything. No lead in a series or anything.
Yeah.
That's a joke. It's a joke only Ryan will get there. But 2003, she was holding down a part-time job.
Actually, one other person will get it. So it's 3 people.
Yes. One of the.
She was working as a waitress in a cocktail bar.
Well, I mean, she was
He shook her. That was a human lead.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that was.
Yeah, sorry. Don't you want me, baby?
Yeah. Don't you want me, baby? From behind the maitre d's booth.
Yes, right.
This one.
When did they actually? Because we got off topic when they took his, they checked his hands and everything else. Then they tackled. What was the actual charge? So they charged him, and how long was the trial? Because I missed the whole thing,
Well, we'll get into that now. The trial, he was charged with second-degree murder, and remember, he initially confessed to the limo driver because he said he walked out of the house and Phil said, "I think I just killed somebody." Now, what he said...
Yeah, that's what I thought conflicted off the bat, because I know almost nothing except for the part where he says she shot herself. So when you told me that part, which I hadn't heard, I was like, well, now I don't even know which way to go.
Well, and when he went to the police and talked to the police, his story changed. And he said that what she did was she had the gun, which was his gun. He apparently kept it in a drawer next to the front door. He had guns placed everywhere in his house. You go through his house, there was always a gun handy to be grabbed because he was paranoid. And he said that she was kissing the gun, and that when she was kissing the gun, the barrel of the gun, it went off accidentally. And he said she accidentally killed herself. But the problem with that is that what they determined was that the gun was actually put against her front teeth. So when it was fired, it blew her front teeth backwards, and it exploded her teeth out of her head, right? So generally, if you're going to kill yourself, you put the gun in your mouth. That's probably a really bad gesture I just made. But you put the gun in your mouth. You don't put it to your actual teeth, right? Or to the side of your head or under your chin. I don't know of many people who choose. I don't know of too many people who choose to shoot themselves through their front teeth. That was one of many.
Epstein.
Well, he went down, but a slightly different way. Now I'll tell you some more.
It's equivalent, though.
I'll tell you some more little details of this case, and you guys tell me what you think about them. Phil Spector that night was wearing a white lady's jacket. A white lady's jacket. Yes. There were blood stains on the sleeve of his jacket. Are him and
Steven Tyler friends?
They share a lot of stylistic quirks, I must admit. Just Steven Tyler has more just bandanas and shit. But the blood on his jacket, the jacket was found stuffed away in an upstairs closet by the police. There was also some drops of blood, of Lana's blood, and again, Lana's blood was on his jacket, up the railing of the stairs. So during the time between the police arriving and them entering the house, it appears that Phil took off his clothes, put on his blousey pajamas, took his jacket that had bloodstains on it up the stairs and hid the jacket in an upstairs closet. There was also a diaper found, and the diaper was covered in her blood. And that was hidden as well in a bathroom upstairs. So
he just had, was it an adult diaper?
No. Well, I mean, I don't know.
He would say, like, why would he have a diaper just laying around?
Why would Phil Spector? I don't know why.
That's why I asked if it was an adult diaper.
I'm afraid Phil Spector. I'm afraid to ask why he would have a diaper. But he used this diaper apparently to try to clean up her blood, and then he took it upstairs and put it in the bathroom. So he was changing the scene of the crime. He was like trying to clean shit up. The gun that they found had a smear of blood on it, as if someone was wiping it off. So it seemed he tried to wipe off maybe fingerprints or maybe the blood itself off the gun, but there was still blood on it, and it was just smeared around. And that's how they knew it had been wiped. So there were a lot of very odd things at the scene of that crime. He posted a $1 million bail almost immediately.
By odd, do you mean overwhelming evidence?
Yes, there was huge, overwhelming evidence. So this dude was free while he was awaiting the trial, which began in March of 2007. Now, keep in mind, this murder took place in 2003. The trial didn't begin until 2007. The whole time, Phil Spector's free, living up in his
insane.
He's on bail, living, and he's doing these videos where he's trying to tell his side of the story, and he's sitting there and his hands are like this the whole time because he trembled a lot. I don't know if it was a neurological thing or if it was a drugs thing or a drinking thing, but his hands were really trembling. When I think about that, sometimes I wonder if that trembling hand wasn't the reason Lana Clarkson died. But one way or another, the first trial, which I said began in 2007, actually ended in a mistrial, a hung jury, because there was a lot of fishy stuff going on. Apparently, the defense attorney accused a forensics expert of hiding evidence. Phil Spector wound up going through 3 different attorneys, the first of which was Robert Shapiro, famous for the O.J. Simpson debacle. But Phil fired Robert Shapiro.
I was going to say, if anyone can get you out, I'm kidding.
Yeah, in his eyes, it wasn't a debacle. He's like winning.
Yeah.
See, the thing about Robert Shapiro that was weird was that Robert Shapiro wasn't apparently not all that great an attorney, but he knew how to get a team together, which is what benefited OJ, you know, because Shapiro is the one who brought in Johnny Cochran and brought in F. Lee Bailey. And Shapiro himself didn't really do all that much. In fact, apparently some of those guys looked down on Shapiro as being like this lesser attorney, you know.
I kind of got that when I watched that Netflix series, you know, because I didn't know that about him either. But like just watching the portrayal, like even if you didn't know that, you know, you were like, this guy is, you know, the guy, you know, like
he's over there popping popcorn.
Yeah, pretty much.
He was John Travolta, right? Played him in the series.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that. There were a lot of inaccuracies in that series, but it was pretty good. It was still pretty good. Sarah Paulson's a good actress. She was a very good Marcia Clark, I thought. And the guy that played Chris Darden was really, really good. But anyway.
It was surprisingly pleasant.
Yeah. But every time I saw Cuba Gooding Jr. in that series, I thought, wow, he's really short to play OJ. Because, you know, you always see OJ next to people and he's towering over them, and then you see the show and, you know, Cuba's looking up at everybody. But anyway, retrial. Nope, you cut out there for a second, Ryan.
I said you would have thought they would have like compensated more for that, like some boxes or something.
Yeah, put him on the
Apple box.
Apple box. The retrial for Phil Spector, however, began in October of 2008. And this is where you see a lot of the wild stuff, like the thumbnail of this video where Phil Spector would show up in court, and he had a collection of wigs, because as I said before, he was bald on top. He had the huge frizzy gray afro wig. He had the golden lock wig. He had like the long Rick James wig.
I'm telling you, it reminds me. Remember Return to Oz? The lady had the cabinets of different heads that she just put a new head on every day, depending on what her mood was.
Well, unfortunately, Phil Spector's face never changed. It was just the hair.
Yeah, the hair. Yeah, but it just kind of reminds me of that. It's like, oh, this will be this is Tuesday's hair. This is my moody trial day hair.
And the funny thing was, he did kind of have reasons for why all of these wigs were there. Like in crazy Phil Spector mind, he was sending out signals to people with his wigs, and like they would get it. I know he liked to do press conferences. He was never quiet outside the courtroom. He would always throw something in when his attorney was saying something. He loved to call the district attorney Hitler-like district attorney, and the cops were stormtroopers who barnstormed his house and knocked him down for no good reason and shocked him for no good reason, even though the barbs got caught in his blousy shirt. Didn't really shock him. But he was always talking about how, it's the classic sort of paranoid delusional thing about how everybody is at fault. Lana was at fault. She shot herself. The cops are at fault. The district attorney is at fault. But Phil Spector, in his mind, is never at fault for the fact that he liked to pull guns on women and everybody else, and apparently accidentally or otherwise shot this woman through her front teeth. Eventually, the case went to the jury, and it took them 19 days. Like, why it took them 19 days to come to a decision is totally beyond me. But luckily, the decision they made, I think, was the right one. He was found guilty of second-degree murder, which was a big deal when it happened. Because remember, we're talking about coming on the heels of O.J., we're coming on the heels of Robert Blake, two people who got away with crimes which had almost insurmountable piles of evidence surrounding them, pointing straight to the person's guilt. Phil Spector was the first huge celebrity murder trial in this sort of series of three in which the verdict came back to his detriment. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, I was just thinking about, it was like there was that period where it was just like, seemed like Hollywood was always on trial. Somebody, because you had Robert Blake, you had the Michael Jackson trial going on, and then you had this one start up. And it was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. See, if Michael Jackson had murdered someone, it would have been a quartet instead of just the three. Yeah. But he didn't murder anyone that we know about. But yeah, the Phil Spector thing, he was ultimately sentenced to 19 years in prison, which meant that he would be 88 years old before he was eligible for parole. So he got a hard time. They sent him to Stockton, California, where he is to this day. Phil Spector is still alive, minus his wigs.
He's got a new wall of sound.
Yeah. But
terrible. My bad jokes. I'm sorry.
But can you imagine Phil Spector, this like spoiled little brat who's been rich since he was 20 and had everyone bend over? Can you imagine the culture shock of suddenly being behind bars? I mean, I can't, that's...
I mean, is it a nicer prison facility? Because sometimes they send them in with normal, hardened...
I don't think they're going to let him anywhere near the general population. I mean, I don't think Phil would.
Well, not that, but sometimes they're like, oh, we'll send them to this prison that isn't as,
Yeah, I don't know what Stockton
rough and tumble, like. or we'll keep him separated from the rest of them. And
yeah, I don't know. I've never been to Stockton. I haven't murdered anybody yet. So
okay. I didn't know if you'd read about it or anything.
No, I don't know. I do know that anywhere he's being held, like in a closet, is probably not preferable for him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Because
he's so used to going where he wants to go and doing what he wants to do and, smacking around whoever he wants to smack around. I can only imagine the culture shock of that. Now, it's worth noting, I think, that a very good movie in 2013 came out in which Al Pacino played Phil Spector. I would highly recommend it. It's a really good movie. It co-stars Helen Mirren. She plays his attorney, the third one. Shapiro was the first one. I don't know who the second one was. And then the third one was the lady who in the film is portrayed by Helen Mirren. And it's kind of seen through her point of view. Pacino does a tremendous job as Phil Spector. And it's written and directed by David Mamet, Again, very good movie if anybody wants to check that out.
Does he do mammoth speak?
Oh, you mean something like this? Rebecca, what do you know? Rebecca?
Yes. What?
I understand. Yes?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes. No, wait. No, one moment.
Wait
One moment.
Yes, I understand.
Exactly so. Yes.
The wall.
No. Exactly. No. The wall of sound.
The
yes.
sound.
Exactly.
The sound.
Exactly.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I know.
I know.
The
sound.
Yes.
The wall.
Okay. Mammoth speak. And scene. That's our example of mammoth speak. But anyway.
Look at that face.
People used to talk about that David Mamet wrote really realistic dialogue. But I'm so glad that's not realistic dialogue. Could you imagine how irritating it would be if people talked like that?
Trying to order a burrito at Taco Bell would take days.
But even Mamet has said himself that his dialogue is not realistic. He says it's poetic. It's a poetic style of dialogue. I think we've lost Ryan's audio. What happened there? Look at him. He's turned into Buster Keaton over there. But anyway, this is kind of comical in its own way.
It's
Oh,
I was gonna say
he
was gonna do charades.
He's back.
Did that work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should have. If it had gone on any longer, we would have just started putting words in your mouth like a bad Japanese film.
That's right.
I figured it out a while back, but I was like, fuck it. Sure. We're almost to the end. Just don't.
But what did you think? Did you see any of the film, Ryan?
Just the scene where he was pretty much like, it was like kind of like when we joke, how dare you? You know, it was his version of how dare you. So I don't know the movie enough to tell you the exact scene, but the scene I saw, he was kind of, I think it was like in a courtroom setting, and he was just explaining to everyone how they were fucked up.
Yes, I know that scene. It's where they're doing the rehearsal for the trial. Because at first, in the actual trial, they thought they might put Phil Spector on the stand. And apparently...
Great.
And that's what you see in the movie is them doing a rehearsal where they're kind of pushing him the way the attorneys would actually push Phil Spector. And he goes nuts, ballistic, like full Al Pacino ballistic.
You two were great a second ago, by the way.
Oh, yes, the Mammoth Speak. Yeah, we've been waiting to demonstrate Mammoth Speak for a long time on this show.
Fantastic.
Because we started out acting in theater, so everyone, David Mamet's a huge, like a god in theater, and so, but all of his plays are written and performed like that. Not so much his movies. I mean, some of his movies are, and some of them aren't. Like Phil Spector, the film, isn't so Mamet speaky. There's hints of it, but it's not like crazy. I think he uses that mostly on stage to keep people interested. When it's all dialogue, so everyone's talking over each other, and it's just really fast banter. In films, he has the image to play with a little more, But yeah, I know exactly the scene you're talking about, and that is the reason why they did not put Phil Spector on the stand in the trial, because they thought if this guy is on the stand, people aren't going to feel bad for him. They're going to realize how fucking crazy he is. I guess it was sort of akin again to the O.J. Simpson thing, why they didn't put O.J. on the stand. It was like, we better just not do that. Because, hey, later in O.J.'s case at the civil trial, he did take the stand and lost the case. So, I think sometimes attorneys have that point of view of, and they're probably right, let's just keep this guy as mum as we possibly can. And they learned from the O.J. Simpson, and Robert Blake took the stand in his civil trial as well and lost. So I don't think they were going to risk Phil, taking the stand, because that could be a real shit show. It would be great for us if it was televised.
I'd watch.
Yeah.
But I don't think that trial wasn't televised, because that was to the point when people were like, we're not doing this anymore.
He's on the stand. He's got a gun hidden there as well,
Yeah. He would probably be like, I'm going to show you how I did this. Give me that gun. Come here. Because this is my theory, okay? If I want to throw out my theory about how it happened, I think probably the lady, Lana, wanted to leave at a certain point. And she had bruises on her wrists. So there had been some sort of like grabbing her or a struggle of some kind. And I think maybe he either put her down in the chair or she decided to sit down in the chair just to calm the situation down or calm down herself. And he got this gun out of the bureau. And his shaky fucking hand is holding this gun on her. And I think probably that shaky hand pulled the trigger. And that's how Lana died. I don't know that I believe it was intentional. I think maybe he did it accidentally. But even if you do it accidentally, you did kill somebody holding a gun on them when you shouldn't have been,
And you only did it accidentally because you were trying to make the point that you would kill them with a gun.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there's a lot of logic to be had in the whole thing.
And she's covered in bruises, which insinuates obviously assault.
Yes. So, you can't keep someone in your house and not allow them to leave. Kidnap. Right. Damn it. There went my whole social life right there. But yeah, so that's my personal opinion. Do you guys think that's anywhere near what might have happened? Or do you think maybe it was an accidental suicide? She was playing with the gun and...
No, I don't think that's what it was. I think he's just...
The only reason I think that maybe he accidentally shot her was that the whole front of the teeth thing. Like, say, for example, say you really dislike someone, like you want them dead. You might shoot them in the head, but you're not saying, you know what, I want to burn the mental image of me shooting you directly in like the face. You know what I mean? Like, it's just most people don't. I don't think it would take a weird you have a Jeffrey Dahmer like fascination with killing to want to shoot someone in the teeth.
Right. And even if she was kissing the gun, I mean, if you kiss the gun, you would probably be holding it like this, But this bullet went straight into her mouth, like this, like you were holding the gun like this, So
even if you had never thought about it once in your life, all you gotta do is touch a gun to your lips. Well, that's not pleasant,
And it's very awkward. It's an awkward way to hold a gun toward yourself, because you're like this. I don't know. That just doesn't seem to me it's not very natural. It seems like if you were just playing with a gun, you would put it here, you'd put it here. You wouldn't just let's see if I can get it here, And there's a lot of things about this that just, trying to hide the bloody jacket, the diaper, trying to wipe off the gun. The fact that the first thing he said right after it happened was, I think I just killed somebody. I mean, if someone accidentally shot themselves in front of me, I would probably walk out of the house and say something like, yeah, that girl just shot herself.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I probably did it.
Right. Why would the first thing you say be that? These things are just so obvious, I don't know if it's more obvious than, say, something like Robert Blake, because that one has got a lot of, obvious stuff in it too. But the fact, basically, if Phil Spector had gotten off like the other guys did, I would have had to have just broken down and said, man, you can just get away with murder in Los Angeles if you're a celebrity. Like, you're rich and you want to kill somebody, go to Los Angeles. Because, but he did go to prison. And like I say, that's where he still is. So maybe it's not a general rule that if you're famous, you can get away with murder. A lot of people do, but not Phil.
It just depends who you are and why.
Do you think that...
it's a weird conversation too, because sometimes, there has to have been people who have been forced to kill people who aren't that guy. They're not going around trying to kill anybody. But say you run say a software company, and you have nothing nefarious at all, but some guy in Austria read that you're the worst person on the planet and is in your backyard. You know what I mean? What are you gonna do? You know. So it's. I'm sure it's happened when the government's been look, okay, you have 40,000 employees and you're worth $2.8 billion. And this guy's just from Austria. We're just not going to say anything, and that story I'm sure has happened more. You got to understand too, numbers are crazy. There's 7 billion people. So even if 1/2 of 1/10 of 1/8 of 1/7 of the people are crazy, that's a lot of crazy people.
Yeah.
So,
and you know,
and then as you get old, you kind of see there's a lot of stories the government's just giving us the nice little, like, this is what we got to say, but there's some fucked up shit here, just don't bother us about it.
Well, do you think if he had been more at the height of his career?
That's a good question. Would he have gotten away with it?
Yeah, it's amazing how these people always come crashing down when they're not in the height of making their money.
That's true. That's another similar vein amongst these guys. They were already kind of past their prime. Phil Spector was way past his prime. Because 20-something years, he hadn't done really anything other than been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I think he tried to weasel his way into a Celine Dion album, but she was like, no, my dear, you will not do it. But yeah, maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe his crazy fucking fright wigs had something to do with it. Walking into the court, and the jurors were like, what the hell is that? This guy's insane. The fact that he sort of sat there looking like a killer the whole time with crazy eyes. You know, I mean, that probably didn't help.
Did you love being his lawyer? Like, help me out a little bit, God.
And what was amazing is, like, right when the verdict was read, he just sort of sat there, like, with the same stunned expression. I don't know if he was stoned or what, but he was just like, maybe it didn't sink in until later that, honey, you're not going back to that castle. You're going to a different kind of castle, and it ain't good.
No. This is all part of his plan.
Yes, yeah. It's amazing he didn't. Well, I don't know. Maybe he did try to smuggle a gun into the courtroom. Not that we know of.
It was in his wig.
Yes, that'd be great. Like, he reached into the frizzy afro and pulled out.
This is how it happened.
Right. Oh, you want to see how it happened? This is how it happened. You darn kids, I would have gotten away with it. You know, I could see one of those Scooby-Doo things pulling it off, and that wig shoots up out, and it's Phil Spector. But anyway, I think we've reached the end of our time for this show on Phil Spector. It was a pretty fun discussion with my two friends here. I'm glad you guys joined me. Thank you, Ryan.
No problem.
And thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
We'll be back again soon with another topic. But until then, I hope you all stay safe and healthy and take care of yourselves.